There we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Wednesday study class that shall not be named. Looking forward to studying with all of you guys today. Looking forward to studying with the people who are here and also the people who will be watching online. Because usually we get, 6 or 7 people sometimes here, but then we get another 10 people watching on YouTube who don't want to participate. So it's great that everybody feels comfortable joining us. So today we have an incredibly interesting topic. As we spoke about the Napoleon Jews last week, so Larry and Michael and some others said, why don't we talk a little bit about some of the other messianic characters? So we're going to do 2 Jewish ones, and on November 30th, we'll talk about the non-Jewish messiahs. We'll talk about Cyrus, Alexander, and maybe talk a little bit more about Napoleon. So our next classes, next week we'll talk about Bar Kokhba, the famous Messiah from the 2nd century CE. And then just to let everybody know, we're going to have class on the 9th. We're not going to have class on the 16th or 23rd. I'll send that out because I'm speaking on Bluffton on the 16th anyway. And on the 23rd, obviously, it's the week of Thanksgiving, which I'm happy to still have a class, but I just assume people wouldn't want. So Jay, good morning. Ron, Flossie, good morning. And good morning to Michael, Larry, everybody else who's watching. Today we're going to talk about the extremely strange to us world of Shabtai Tzvi. Now, who is Shabtai Tzvi? If you're going to take a poll of messianic characters in Jewish history, he would be number 1. It is a fantastic tale that almost seems like it's impossible. It took an incredible amount of circumstances for this to happen, and an incredibly strange and misguided man, or maybe very straight guided because he did have an interesting life. So, how many of you guys have heard of Shabtai Tzvi? Okay, you've probably heard. So, there have been messianic characters in Jewish history. Again, as I mentioned, Cyrus, Alexander, Bar Kokhba, but none with the furor and the belief in inevitability that stretched so far and so wide as with Shabtai Tzvi. And remember, the last great Messiah character for the Jewish world was Bar Kokhba in the 2nd century BCE, who led an actual rebellion against Rome. And again, his number 1 supporter was Rabbi Akiva. Before that, you've got to go to Alexander and Cyrus. There's been a couple others. But in terms of the Jewish world at large, there's nobody who compares to Shabtai Tzvi because there's really possibly nobody who embraced being the Messiah as much as him. So Shabtai Tzvi is a 17th century character, which is important that it's the 17th century because we're going to talk first about what led to a man being able to say, I am the Messiah, and so many people believing him. Because for us, it just sounds, when you read about it, you're like, how was this able to happen? But of course, we've seen throughout history, charismatic men and some women do some extraordinary things, and some of them very dangerous, some of them strange. But how do you get such a following? It's incredible to me that he was able to do so. But again, we've seen it in other places. But in the Jewish world, Shabtai Tzvi is born in 1626. Some say on Tisha B'Av, which is going to be important. Tisha B'Av is the 9th of Av. It's the day we mourn the destruction of both temples and other things. So he's born in the 17th century. And why is it essential that we understand the period he's in? Because he's born in 1626, so he's going to be in his 20s when we have the Chmielnicki rebellion, the Chmielnicki massacre, insurrection, whatever you want to call it. One of the worst times in Jewish history, the worst moment in Jewish history since the expulsion from Spain. Basically, and we could talk about this at another time, from the 1575 to 1650s, Poland controlled parts of Ukraine because of a previous accord with Russia, basically. And so the Polish nobles controlled Ukraine, and they would send the Jewish community of Poland to go and live in Ukraine and collect taxes and be their officials over there. And so there is a particularly terrible rebellion led by a minor noble who is upset that the Cossacks that are now in Ukraine are being mistreated, that some of his land they tried to take it. And he's able to create a union with the Crimean Tatars, or Tatars, I always pronounce this incorrectly, that gives them an army that is able to take on Poland. Poland at this time is a very strong army. This will be kind of the end of the Polish independence strength. There'll be kind of a minor country taken over by everybody over the next 300 or 400 years. And so he starts this rebellion against the Polish controllers, the Roman Catholics, and of course, who happens to be a sidebar to this? The Jews. So from the Jewish world, we look at it as the destruction of hundreds of thousands of Jews. That was a sidebar to this rebellion against the Poles I'm sorry? And so it just, again, it was a terrible time as so many Jews were killed. And what we talked about last week is, when does the messianic belief heighten? Belief in a Messiah is almost always connected towards the situation for Jews at that time, at a time period. So it is basically that the freer Jews are, the more accomplished Jews are, the better Jews are doing, the lower the messianic belief. The more difficult the age, the more persecuted, the higher the messianic belief grows. It's pretty obvious. If you don't have power and life is miserable, then you're praying to God to save you. If you live in America in the 21st century, you're empowered, you don't believe you need a Messiah, we feel like we can do it ourselves. And this is during one of the worst moments in European history. There's a lot of Jews living in Ukraine. These reprisals went all over Europe. And so there was this depression over the Jewish world over these terrible atrocities, hundreds of thousands of Jews killed. And not only that, there was a belief that it could happen to anybody anytime, because the Jews who were attacked were these really well-kept Polish Jews who had good jobs and were, connected. And these are the Jews who are attacked. So it's during this period that Shabtai Zvi is able to create his messianic view. So again, this is just a regular guy. He is not from a particularly impressive family. Obviously, it's an impressive family. His father was wealthy. He was a trader and lived in the city of Smyrna, which is just a great name, which is part of the Ottoman Empire at this time. I don't know if anybody's been to Smyrna. I have never been there, but I love just saying the name over and over again. Smyrna, Smyrna, Smyrna. Has anybody been there, by the way? Okay, nobody's been there. Okay.
It's in Poland?
It's in Greece right now. It's in Greek today, but at the time it was controlled by the Ottomans. It's on the Aegean coast. And so his father is wealthy. They lived there during a time where this particular area is doing very well. There's some trades. It brings the English. He works for the English, and he becomes very wealthy. So he sends his son Shabtai, which is a really cool name, and it's basically based on the word Shabbat, Shabtai. So he sends his son to school, to yeshiva, obviously, to study, as Jews did. He becomes fairly proficient at the Talmud. He's not, not an exceptional student, but he's very into mysticism. He's very into the Kabbalah and Isaac Luria. Isaac Luria, I think we spoke about, is kind of the most important figure in Kabbalah history. He's from a, century before, but he is the guy who brought it to the world, basically the Jewish world, and popularized it. So he reads the Zohar and he's doing all these things. And he, as everybody else, knows about what's happened with the Chmielnicki rebellion. He's living during that period. And the messianic idea really takes hold with him. Not only that, there was all this other apocalyptic vision from the Christian world of what's going to happen here and there. So the apocalyptic ideas, were there. And so in the Christian world, and his fame actually stretches to the Christian world. There's even a saying that one of the reasons that Oliver Cromwell allowed Jews to come back to England, because Oliver Cromwell takes over during this time. Remember, he allows Jews to come back to England. That's one of the reasons Mikveh Israel was founded, because Jews are allowed back in England after being kicked out in 1290. One of the reasons that he let Jews back in was because some of his ministers were saying the Jewish Messiah is coming, and we want to, be part of, we want to be part of, have the Jewish world here. Probably business-wise, that's what they were more thinking about. So he has this vision that he is the Messiah. So in many cases, the Messiah comes when I say, Larry's the Messiah. Cyrus, you did something great for us. Bar Kokhba is leading a massive rebellion against overwhelming odds. Napoleon frees the Jews and changes the course of Jewish history. I mean, these are huge events. Alexander the Great takes over the world, comes to Israel, takes it over, does not kill anybody, just basically is very kind and generous and says, support me, and leaves the Jews alone. So Shabtai Zvi is different because he doesn't do any of this stuff. He basically just says, I'm the Messiah. That's it. So he says he is the Messiah. And that's how it all starts, which is really strange because usually when people say this, and it's happened a lot, this has happened untold amount of times where individuals say they're the Messiah. Obviously, most of the time, 99.9%, we never hear about these people. But in this case, he starts and he immediately starts doing some crazy things. Like the first thing he does is he starts saying the word Adonai and start trying to pronounce the Tetragrammaton, which is against the rules, trying to pronounce aloud the name of God against the rules, which of course that is really against the rules. He talks about his visions, and he talks about how he's going to create changes, and that some of the laws are no longer applicable because there's certain laws in Judaism that are only applicable till the Messiah comes, which for most of us means they're going to be forever. But he says some of these laws, and we'll talk about that, we don't have to do something, follow these laws anymore, is because I'm here. And so he is, he's a kid. He's like 20, 22 when he starts saying these things. And of course, what do you think happens immediately? I'm sure some people thought it was very cute for the moment, but eventually he gets kicked out. Now, again, you cannot excommunicate Jews because there's no way to keep somebody from being Jewish. If you're Jewish, you're Jewish. But what you can do is do a cherem. And a cherem is basically you're kicked out of the community. Like you still are Jewish, but you are not allowed here. Because remember, everybody in that world lives in their community. Nobody's an individual. And if I kick you out of the community, you are in trouble. Larry.
Was he kicked out by the Jewish community?
Oh, yeah, by the Jews. Yeah, the rabbis of Smyrna and the other places in the Greek area kicked him out and basically banished him.
Was there a particular incident in Smyrna at the time? You say it was under the Ottoman Turks, I guess.
Yeah. No,
That led
this
to.
has nothing to do with the Ottomans yet. This is before. He's still small time.
Oh,
We know he's going to come into the Ottomans' ideas, but right now he's just basically a kid going in the Jewish community saying, I'm the Messiah, I'm the Messiah. And he's breaking rules. He's saying the name of God. He's trying to get followers, trying to get people to give him money.
but what I guess I'm trying to get at was what was the unrest that was in the community in Smyrna that led him to, come up with the idea or, the concept that that he would be the Messiah? You said, that generally times of unrest lead to
Right.
messianic figures.
Well, right now at this point, there's none of that. I mean, the
Oh,
community, this Jewish community is not, I mean, the Chmielnicki massacres, everybody knows it's going on. But for his community, he is not there. He is in the, by the Aegean Sea. His father is a wealthy trader working for England at a very good time to be a Jew with connection to England. They're making money. The community is safe. It's part of the Ottoman Empire. The Chmielnicki massacres do not extend to the Ottoman Empire because obviously that would ignite a war. And the Poles are already trying to get the Ukrainians to fight a war against the Ottomans. One of the reasons Ukrainians rebel is because they don't want to fight a war against the Ottomans. So there's no actual connection between what's going on yet. He's just this guy who's saying, I'm the Messiah. And he gets kicked out of town as a crazy person. And he moves to Constantinople. And in Constantinople, he meets a guy who basically is a regular preaching guy who says, you know what, you are the Messiah. I'm going to write a treatise about you being the Messiah. So he finds an activist, kind of is, you always need to have the guy who is, preaching your greatness. And this is one of them. His name was Abraham Yechini. And he writes something and says, this guy is the Messiah. And he's probably a fairly prominent guy. He's from the Ottoman Empire. Constantinople is, again, the center of this world. And so with this in hand and with this confirmation, he goes to Salonika. And obviously, Salonika at this time period is a place where there are a lot of Kabbalists. And so, which is obviously also in Greece. So speaks the language, he's connected. And so he goes to Salonika to preach that he is the Messiah to all of these other Kabbalists. So, but the same thing happens there. I mean, they're Kabbalists, but they're not crazy. So they say, what are you talking about? And they banish him out. And he is kicked out, and then he goes different places for a couple of years. We don't know exactly what happens. And he's probably in Jerusalem. He's in different places. Then eventually he gets to Cairo. So he's been for a couple of years pronouncing himself as the Messiah. He's got one person who supported him in Constantinople. He's probably got other supporters, people willing to give money. And then, but nothing's really happening except for him doing it until he gets to Cairo. And that's where things are going to change. Cairo obviously is a major center of life in this world. It's controlled by the Ottomans at this time, but it's a very, very wealthy city. It's, of course, one of the great cities in antiquity and continues to be a very important place. And there he meets a guy in either in Aleppo or a guy from Aleppo, but he meets him in Cairo, who supports him. And this is a very wealthy, connected guy. He's a mystic himself. He's famous for supporting Talmudists, and he supports the poor students. And he's he's one of the richest guys. He's got a high position, because Jews could have high positions in the Ottoman Empire. And he supports him with his money and his belief. And this guy's name's Raphael Yosef Halevi, and he supports him and gives him money and sends him to Jerusalem. And because of this man's support, because this man was considered a mensch, you know, he's wealthy, but he supports all the scholars, he supports everybody, he's always donating money, but yet, even though he's wealthy, he lives as an aesthetic. I mean, he lives a poor lifestyle, even though he's very rich. And so, you know, some of the time he does have big meals is when he invites the poor to come eat with him, especially scholars. So this guy supports him as the Messiah, writes, you know, and Shabtai Zvi now goes to Jerusalem with his support as well. Plus, Shabtai Zvi is charismatic. He's got a good singing voice. You know, he's a very good speaker. He's now supported by this other guy, so he's got money and he's giving money to the poor. He's always trying to let people see how good of a person he is, that he lives a poor lifestyle. So he's publicly trying to show that he is a good person. And he goes to Jerusalem, which is a very different place than Cairo. Jerusalem is a very poor city. It's going to be a very poor city since the time it was sacked by the Romans in, 66, or 68. So for, 1,500 years, it's been a poor city. It's in the middle of nowhere in the Ottoman Empire. Have you guys ever been, has everybody here been to Jerusalem? So Jerusalem, up until modern Zionism, have you been in the Old City? That was the entire Jerusalem. That was it. There was nothing outside the Old City except in the 19th century, Moses Mendelssohn, who came to our congregation and spoke here, by the way, built that, what do you call it? The windmill. Have you guys seen the windmill? So he wanted to build a windmill and create a community outside the actual city. Everybody thought he was crazy because there's goblins. But until the 20th century, there was nothing in Jerusalem outside the Old City. And so Shabtai Zvi goes to the Old City of Jerusalem. It's very poor, but it's still the holy city in the Jewish world. People are still facing it to pray, so it's still got prominence. And what he does is he brings money to them from this very wealthy Cairo guy. And it's not a big city. It's not like Cairo. Cairo's a huge city comparatively, and so he brings money to these people in Jerusalem, and it helps them, of course, be very happy and supportive. Plus, it's a depressing place to live. Plus, they're hearing about the Chmielnicki massacres, these untold horrors. Plus, there is a woman who survives the Chmielnicki massacres. She hides as a Christian, or she's put to a convent, and she escapes the convent, and she tells everybody that she is destined to marry the Messiah. So it's a very strange, beautiful woman who's destined to marry the Messiah. So what does he do? He goes, meets this woman, and marries her. And now all of a sudden you've got this charismatic survivor, beautiful woman who's saying she's marrying this Messiah. You got this charismatic guy who's got money and supporting the poor in Jerusalem, saying he's the Messiah. We're reeling from the Chmielnicki rebellion. Jews are being invited to England for the first time in 400 years. And it's all of these things happening. And in Israel, in Gaza, he finds another supporter named Nathan of Gaza, a very prominent man who says, I'm going to basically be your right-hand man. And he says, I am your Elijah. And he starts promoting him. And even though Jerusalem, the rabbis there are basically going to give him a cherem as well, he goes all the way around and he eventually gets back to Smyrna. And when he gets back there, he is probably shocked that he gets back there and he is greeted like a king. He was kicked out of his own city, but he comes back years later. His fame has spread, And now his city, and now everybody's coming and saying, oh, I remember him when he was just a boy. And he comes in and they start blasting shofars and saying, here comes the Messiah. So it's so ironic that, you kind of, he goes back home and he's the hometown hero now. And they start praying to him. They give him an acronym, Amira, which basically is the acronym for our Lord and King, Majesty be exalted. And he is now in a very fine position. Plus, he uses his position and understands the need to take control. So anybody who doesn't agree with him, what does he do? He sends his henchmen to beat him up. And what does he do to the rabbis who kicked him out? He puts other rabbis in their place, obviously. And so all of a sudden his fame starts to spread, and basically it is not, it's not him just doing it. Stories are being told about his miracles all over Europe. They're talking about him. Baruch Spinoza writes about the rumors about maybe this guy could be the Messiah. There are stories of his heroism. There are miracles happening all over the place because of him. And of course, obviously, some believe that the Messiah would come. It's not really a Jewish belief generally, but some believe the Messiah will come after a time of great strife, which we just had. So all of a sudden, you have these Shabbatiyans spreading all over the place. And he starts spreading his ideas of Judaism. Fast days. You're not going to fast on the 10th of Tevet, which is when the assault on Jerusalem is begun, because you don't need the Jerusalem anymore because the Messiah is here. You don't have to mourn anymore. You don't have to fast on these days anymore because the Messiah is here. You only have to fast until the Messiah is here. There are writings about him, rejoicing. There are messages sent all over the place. People who do not agree are shouted down. He is prayed to in synagogues around Europe and in the Ottoman Empire. They're saying prayers to him in synagogues. Like, it became so popular that the rules in many congregations, and this is a lot of them, we shouldn't just pray for him on the Sabbath. We should pray for him every time we read Torah. So Mondays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, we pray, blessed is the Lord, King, the holy, righteous, Shabtai Zvi, the Messiah of the God of Jacob. And this is what people are praying in services. Not only that, what about the people who don't want to pray to this guy in services? Well, guess what? If you don't want to pray, then you need to stay longer in services, and we're going to hold you here until you do say the prayer. So you go to services and you're captive until you say these prayers. You can't leave, or you can't come. And this is how these movements with a little strong arm and people give in, and then all of a sudden they say, why not? And and his birthday becomes a Jewish holiday, which is a problem because what's his birthday? His birthday is Tisha B'Av, the greatest day of mourning in the Jewish world. Whether that's true or not, we don't know, but that was what everybody claims. So now, instead of mourning on Tisha B'Av, we're celebrating on Tisha B'Av because we're celebrating the Messiah. There are pictures, Larry.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. About how much time has passed now since the first time when he leaves Smyrna and then goes to Cairo and Jerusalem and then he returns to Smyrna? Is it a couple of years? And how long did it take for this movement to really get started? It sounds like it's going good now.
Well, around 1648, like the height of Khmelnytsky is when it starts. It really gets going, 10 years later. So over a period of 10 years is really when he takes charge and starts really building up, he starts getting kicked out for a couple of years. 1650, and nobody knows exactly for sure because there's some debates about when he leaves and goes to places. But in the mid 1650s, he's really starting to become a thing. So 8 to 10 years, and then really by 20 years, he is cemented. So 10, 12 years takes him to get going, and then really by about 1660s, when he's in his early 40s or late 30s, 60, that would be, late 30s, mid 30s. So 10 to 15 years for him to really take hold. So he's still a young man, although back then, obviously, people died a lot younger, but he's still in his 30s. So he's young, but he's not so young anymore. So he's got some, gray hairs now a little bit. So he is now becoming a thing. He has proclaimed the Messiah all over the place. He's crushing his enemies. I don't think they're killing them. It's not like that. It's basically, you do this so you're not part of our community. The Jewish world wasn't big on killing people. It was more like, we can kick you out, or we can make you persona non grata, that kind of thing. And since Jews were restricted to their communities, you had to really do what the community was doing. And so he is going through all of these things. And he decides then to go to Constantinople in 1666. So he's, 40 years old. He is now being prayed to throughout the Jewish world in Europe. Not every place, but a lot of places. A lot. I mean, a lot. A very high percentage were doing this. It wasn't like a small movement. So he ends up in Constantinople. And in Constantinople, of course, he is prophesizing his being the Messiah, and then it gets around a little bit that he is prophesizing that he is going to be the next sultan, which obviously is not what the sultan wants to hear. So after all these reports of these he's doing all these miracles, he is imprisoned in Constantinople. So that could have been it, but the problem was the way he's imprisoned. He's imprisoned kind of as a dignitary. And not only that, there is so much money coming in that he's bribing everybody. So in prison, he's living like a king. He's got, on Passover, he slays the Paschal lamb. He's keeping up all of these, he's being visited. His wife is treated like a queen. This beautiful woman is not in prison. She's going all around. She's dressed in beautiful clothing. They're spreading these rumors. People know he's in prison, but know he's not killed, and he's being treated like royalty. And that is, the Sultan is treating this man like royalty. The Sultan is afraid to kill this man. His initials are on every synagogue in Europe. Everybody's praying for his safety. If you go to synagogues, you will see his picture up, sometimes next to King David's picture. We see this a little bit in different today. So in certain places, people are almost on the verge of revolting to the point of persecution because they're so enamored with this man. And so he's really created an entire movement. He's then visited by a man who was a prominent Talmudist named Nehemiah HaKohen, who says the Messiah is coming. And he believes the Messiah is coming, so this guy goes to visit in Constantinople. And of course, Shabtai Zvi is very excited because he's going to meet another groupie, basically. So he's excited. He's going to meet another guy who's going to pronounce him the Messiah, except for the problem is Nehemiah doesn't believe. He meets him and he decides right away, this is not the Messiah. This guy's not the Messiah. And when he says that, he's basically attacked by the Jews there, and he has to run away and save himself from the Jews, who are very much going to probably kill this guy because he's preaching this guy is not the guy I preached. So what does he do? He is basically a vengeful person a little bit, and he finds ways to alert the Sultan to what he calls as the true aspirations of Shabtai Zvi. The Shabtai Zvi wants to overthrow the Sultan. The Sultan's been treating him kind of like a dignitary, not realizing a lot of these things. And he gets people to talk to the Sultan about, hey, this guy is a dangerous man. You need to be careful. And so many of you may know what happens next. The Sultan takes him out of this prison and takes him someplace else, and basically says, I'm going to give you three choices. I'm going to let you prove you're the Messiah. I'm going to have you stand, and we're going to have archers shoot lots of arrows at you. And if they miss every one of them, then you're the Messiah. Number 2, I'm going to have you impaled. Or number 3, you can convert to Islam, and I'm going to give you a good job. And in a very short amount of time that day, he decides, I'm going to become Muslim. He puts on the turban, and he writes, I'm now Muslim. And that's it. So basically, on one day, everything changes. That's how quick he is to make this decision. And so the Sultan gives him the job, and 300 of his followers convert to Islam, and they become known as the Donmei, which we'll talk about in a second. So it's like this. The problem is, what about everybody else? The whole Jewish world is believing this guy's the Messiah. It gets out that he has just converted to Islam, which is a real problem because now the Jews have spent a lot of time and commitment on this, and basically now the Jews are a joke. I mean, Christians and Muslims are laughing at the Jewish communities because they thought this guy was the Messiah, and within 12 seconds he converts to Islam. There's not even a delay. And so the Jewish community has to decide what to do. So some Jews in the community say, no, this is all a pretense. He's still the Messiah. It's all a veil for him to trick the Ottomans, and that he is the Messiah. So a lot of people continue to believe in him. That will wane over time. But then you have this Donmei we're going to talk about in a second. So he converts to Islam. He's given a very nice salary as a doorkeeper, basically, as a nice position. Eventually, the Sultan gets tired of it. They take away his job. His wife dies. He's going to die, a few years after. And on his death, he's studying a little bit of Judaism. So there's still so he dies ingloriously a few years after losing this job. But his legacy continues because there'll be people who believe in him for many years later. Shabbatians will continue to believe in him for many years. And it's really interesting because whereas he can convert to Islam really quickly, the movement can't change as quickly as that. They've invested their lives. Some people believed in him for 25 years. Larry.
You'll have to excuse us. We have another appointment that we have to go to. So
Okay.
we'll have to listen to the end of this on YouTube because this
Okay.
is fascinating.
It's
Thank
a
you so
really
much,
strange
Rabbi.
thing. And that's pretty much the end of his life. So we'll talk a little bit about what happens after he dies. So he dies, and gloriously, nobody knows exactly where he's buried, probably good reason. So they wanted to be a place where people pray to. And so the Shabbatians, or Sabbateans, however you want to do it, will over time start to fade. And again, people will stop believing him. But there's always, there's still going to be some. However, to this day, there are still people who believe he was the Messiah. Because that group of Jews that converted to Islam, called the Don May, there's 100 to 200 or 300,000 of them still around. So there's still a couple 100,000 people today who are crypto Muslims, like they look Muslim, but they have Jewish ideals. But people know this, and they still believe that he is or was the Messiah. And so in this world, and most of them live in Turkey, in this world, some say there's hundreds of thousands, some say a few thousand, but they're a very private, secret group, which doesn't help Jews a lot because you can always point to these people as being, oh, see, those Jews are secret. Where these Don men are not really Jewish, they're not really Muslim. They look Muslim, they pretend to be Muslim, celebrating Muslim Highlands, but openly they tell people they're not Muslim and they're celebrating Jewish holidays. There's 3 sects of them. There's 3 different groups that sometimes get along and sometimes don't, which is how, as always, people don't stay together. There's one group that believes another person took over as the Messiah. There's another group that, what are the 3 groups? There's one that believes another person was Messiah. There's another that believes that this other guy was the Messiah. And then there's another group that just kind of, we don't know that much about their beliefs. So they're a very private group, but they've had an effect because after World War I, when the Ottoman Empire lost, a lot of the young Turks who supported Ataturk's reforms, and Ataturk is the one who made the Ottoman Empire into modern Turkey, a republic. A lot of the supporters of Ataturk were these Don May, who wanted the country to be no longer a Muslim country officially, because obviously that would give them more rights as a different sect. And so they practice a wide range of beliefs. They have their own precepts. They have some strange sexual activities that you can, I think, sleep with other people's wives. They believe you don't have to keep a lot of the laws because of that other religions, but they still believe in the Torah. So, and they still exist. They have certain holidays, Shabtai Zvi's birthday, well, of course, Tisha B'Av is one of their biggest holidays. So, and they're actually not, they're generally pretty well off. I mean, they're basically a whole merchant. It's basically all merchants. So they're still around today. And you can call them a crypto Sabbatean sect. You can call them the Don Me, call them secret Jews. There's a lot of issues, so it's really interesting that, remember, he first said he was the Messiah in 1648. So that's, 324 years ago. And there are still people who believe that. So, Flossie.
2 quick questions. What does Don May translate to?
That is a good question. I forgot what that translates. I think it's a Hebrew word. Is it a Hebrew word? It means like secret, I think. or change. It means change, I think. Yeah.
Okay,
I
and
mean,
my
yeah.
other question, don't laugh with it. When you were saying he thought he was the, can you hear me?
It means to convert, to change, to turn is that's what it means.
Okay, all right. When he thought he was the Messiah, how did we look upon Jesus? He was never referred to as a Messiah, correct?
Right, exactly. So that's one of the things. In Jewish world, there's been lots of messianic characters. At the time of Jesus, there were a lot. It was a messianic time. Times were tough. The Romans were persecuting people. But Jesus didn't play a role because Jesus was a different religion. The Jewish Messiah is not necessarily the Son of God either. But the funny thing is, Shabtai Zvi was doing things of a Jewish Messiah. And like the Jewish Messiah is not supposed to be a miracle worker. It's supposed to be a regular guy who kind of puts the stamp on, But yet in these mystical sects that pop up, the Messiah has almost magic. And does miracles. So, that's what happened.
How old was he when he died?
He died in 1676, so he was about 50 years old. So again, which is a very legitimate age back then. I mean, this is still the 17th century, so living to 50 is a pretty good life, especially when you did as much traveling as he did and you're all over the place. So he lived a full life according to that period. And so in some cases, it's a little bit closer to Muhammad. Muhammad was kicked out of his home area, both kicked out of Mecca, and then he was also kicked out of, what's the second holiest city in Islam? Medina. And he went back and forth and eventually goes back home and he's celebrated. But Muhammad actually created a religion, Shabtai Zvi did not. So, and this is the legacy today. They even used to speak Hebrew and do everything in Hebrew. They switched over to Ladino, so they still speak Ladino and still use Ladino as their holy text, which was never the case in Judaism. All right, so that's a little bit of Shabtai Zvi. If you go online, there is plenty about him. I mean, it is a study to the upteenth degree because it's such a strange story about how one guy just said, "I'm the Messiah," and then eventually people started believing him. And as I said, the biggest difference is the other people who reported to be the Messiah where people were doing incredible things for the Jewish world. Cyrus, Alexander, Bar Kokhba, and Napoleon are the noted ones. And they had done incredible things for the Jewish world for the benefit of the people, where this guy was not. He was just a kid who said, "I'm the Messiah." So generally, yes, Ron.
Yeah, I have a question that Flossie reminded me of. In November, Larry mentioned about going to the library.
Yes.
I mean, if there's only such a small group of us, why are we going to the library?
Well, I think the hope is that we'll have more people because remember, we used to do things live in person. We get up to 20, 25 people. And the thought was, do we want to do it at somebody's home where they may not feel comfortable having people, or do we want to do it in a larger place and then go to a restaurant?
Okay.
So we're going to try it and go to the library, see if people want to go, and then we'll go out for Mexican food afterwards, because obviously Mexican food is a traditional November dish for Jews in Georgia and in South Carolina.
When did Mexican food take over Chinese food?
I don't know. I'd rather do Chinese food. This was the restaurant. They said there's a Mexican restaurant, I guess, right next to the library. I prefer Chinese food, but I'm happy to do Mexican food. Michael?
Sushi.
I'd rather do
Sorry,
that.
interrupted.
I think it's great. So I sent out the tentative schedule. I know we've been confirmed. If nobody wants to the library, we won't do it. We'll do it online. And then the hope is that we'll do a Hanukkah party on December 14th. if anybody wants to host that, and we'll see if that's because I think that would be a lot of fun. I think we should ask Eva and Paul to do it again because man, that food was amazing. So
They're away now. They're celebrating their birthday.
Oh, nothing. I have to leave because I have a therapy.
oh, no worries, we're finished. We're finished.
Okay.
But I sent out the note. We will have class next week. We're going to talk about, we have class next week. Yeah, Bar Kochba. And then we will have class. I don't know the subject for the 9th. And then the last, the 16th and 23rd, we won't have class for this class. All right.
You know, can I suggest a topic? And I'm not sure I can make it
Great.
that week even, but how about Juice for Jesus?
Oh, we could do that on November 9th. That's
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm even going to be
That's
in.
very
I'm not sure I'm
good. Yes.
available that
That's
day.
very
but
good. Well,
you can still
let's do
do
it. We'll do it December 7th then. That day is still, how's that?
Okay, that's fine with me.
And let me tell you, you're talking to the right guy because obviously I was a rabbi in Dallas, which is the Center for Jews for Jesus. And right a few blocks away is where they built the brand new giant Jews for Jesus synagogue.
Rabbi,
Watching.
can we do it in November? I won't be here in December, and where I am, I can't get it.
Michael said he can't do it in November, so why don't we do it in, when are you going to be back, Flossie?
End of December.
So we could do it December 21st. How's that? Oh, we may not be doing that. How about we do it in January?
Okay.
That's fine. You know, I mean, if you want to do it, then I can't make it. I can always look on YouTube.
No, but it
Yeah,
was
but
a
it's more
topic.
fun to have you
Don't
here.
schedule around me.
If you choose a topic, we should do it. So let's see, what's the first, we can do the first coming. That's a real, I think a lot of people will be interested in that. It's a little scary topic. Some is and some not so scary, depending. So that would be January 4th, if that works, and we'll do it that day.
Okay, good.
Rabbi, we're going to do Veterans Day on November 12th. That's Saturday.
We are not. We are doing it on November 5th. We're about to send that.
Okay.
What happened, Ron, we were sending out the note we put on Facebook is the national commander of the Jewish war veterans is coming down to speak.
Okay.
We couldn't get him the 12th because Veterans Day is the 11th. And
Yes.
so he's got to be in parades. And so he wasn't going to be able to hit the 12th, but I asked if we could do it the week before.
Yeah.
And so that's what we'll do. And we're going to do it in the sanctuary so we can, do the virtual stuff.
Hook or by crook, Ollie and I will be at Temple on the 5th of November.
All right, fabulous.
We'll get there somehow.
That's the day he's going to do it, November 5th.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we just confirmed that. We knew we were getting somebody from the Jewish War Veterans, but we got fortunate enough to get the national commander.
That's good.
Yeah,
Very
so that
good.
should be going out this week with all the information.
Very good.
And if you have anybody you guys know in the military or any Jewish War Veterans, I mean, I've already talked to the Jewish War Veterans group here in town, but in Sun City, if anybody who was a veteran, just let us know. And make sure. And there's going to be a lunch afterwards. We're going to have like a nice lunch afterwards.
Okay.
All right, guys.
Romeo.
Very
Thanks,
good.
everybody. A
Take care.
pleasure.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Great
Everybody
topic.
stay
Diane,
well,
Mike.
Michael. Good seeing you, Michael.
Good
Yeah,
seeing
Ron,
back
you
to
look
Ron.
great.
Yeah, you do look great, Ron.
Look
You
like
know,
you're recovered.
I had my checkup at the VA, and all my blood work, they said, was very excellent, and I'm doing very well. And I only have a couple of more physical therapies at NHC. So the doctor at the VA told me as soon as you get done there, you can come here for therapy, which is excellent.
That's awesome.
That's great.
That's great. And I've been hoping one of these days for somebody to tell me just once that you're doing good. They do your test.
I am.
You're doing good, but they never tell me that. So I'm glad you're doing well.
Rabbi, I'm a big fan of yours. You're doing good.
Thanks. You guys
Take
have a
care,
good one.
everybody.
Stay safe, guys.